In security and intelligence, it will always need to be balanced against the best interests of New Zealand, but it is vitally important that this committee has the ability to look at that balance and from time to time create a situation where there are public submissions, where the public can learn more about the activities of these agencies. So, Mr Speaker, we are supporting these motions, but we do believe that there is work to be done to create the appropriate transparent environment in which this committee works.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak to this notice of motion from the Green Party. The Green Party, I think it's fair to say, is pretty sceptical about the level of oversight of our security services. However, we are participating in this committee, and we thank the Leader of the Opposition, David Shearer, for nominating us onto this committee. But like the previous speaker, we think there needs to be tremendously improved oversight of the security services. Because the current committee, it is very difficult for the current committee to properly supervise or provide any kind of oversight of the security services in New Zealand. The Intelligence and Security Committee is not a select committee of the House like other committees. It does not have parliamentary control like other committees. It is a committee established by statute, the Intelligence and Security Committee Act. That's how it is established. The Intelligence and Security Committee has 5 members, the Prime Minister, who's also the Minister responsible for the security services, and two nominees from him, and the Leader of the Opposition and 1 nominee from him. And so this is a 5-person committee established by statute whose job is meant to be to provide some oversight of the activities of the security services. However, the Intelligence and Security Committee has very few powers to do anything much to make the security services answer questions. If, for example, the CEO of a security service declares any information to be sensitive, then we cannot ask any further questions about it. That is written in the Act. So we don't know what the information is, but if the CEO of any security services says, no, the question you're asking is of a sensitive nature, sensitive information, then they don't have to answer any questions about it. So it is fundamentally different to the select committees established under the standing orders of this House. And unlike other select committees, the chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee is the minister responsible for the security services. The way select committees are established in this House is the chair is always independent, so it's not the minister, so that the chair, who's chairing the committee, which is meant to be keeping these government agencies accountable, is at arm's length from the minister. What this means is that very few people know what the security services do. It's very difficult for the Intelligence and Security Service to get to the bottom of what the security services do because we don't have the powers. It means that the chair of the committee is actually the minister, and so it puts us in a very difficult situation. Other jurisdictions don't do this, of course. Other jurisdictions have much better parliamentary or congressional oversight of their security services. Just a quote from you from the former director of the Security Intelligence Agency, William Coby. Mr Coby said, "We in the intelligence and security services can work under a system of parliamentary control. We can do our job, and in fact we are stronger because when we make mistakes and get in trouble, the responsibility is shared with the legislative committees. The intelligence service can do its important work, and yet it can be under the control of our democratic system." That was a quote from the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency from the United States. What that says is that the system we have, where there isn't democratic oversight of the security services, not in any effective way, is not the only system that you can have. Now, this is particularly the case because our security services have a terrible record of basically taking sides in politics. For example, there were some documents that were released to my former colleague Keith Locke, which showed that in the 1980s, the security services were taking a very unhealthy interest in anyone who opposed apartheid in South Africa. And so the SIS seemed to take the view that if you opposed apartheid in South Africa, you were a threat to the New Zealand state, and so you need to be investigated. The SIS has made a habit of targeting law-abiding political dissenters. For example, it targeted Aziz Chowdhury. It burgled his home. The reason we know that is that he was caught burgling. They were caught burgling Aziz Chowdhury's home. Now, that went to the courts, and when it went to the courts, the Security and Intelligence Service lost the court case and was awarded damages, unspecified damages, against the SIS to Aziz Chowdhury. Mr Bennett over there says it's a conspiracy. Well, this is actually on the public record, Mr Bennett. You should try reading it sometime. Might actually help you a little bit. At the time, the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Grieg, said it was reasonable for the SIS to to burgle Aziz Chowdhury's house. However, the courts disagreed and overruled him. A further case where we have concerns about the activities of the SIS would be the long-term persecution of Ahmed Zawi. This is a well-documented case, and the courts repeatedly upheld Mr Zawi's rights against the SIS and the SIS breaches of his rights. Mr Zawi was an Algerian Democrat who was being hunted by the brutal Algerian dictatorship. He was the classic political refugee that members of this parliament should support because he was an advocate for democracy. And that's why we were very disappointed when the Labor government participated in the persecution of Ahmed Zawi over many years. What happened was the Algerian dictatorship provided false information that Zawi was a terrorist to the French government, who then passed it to the New Zealand SIS, who stupidly believed everything they were told. And it took massive intervention by the courts, court case after court case after court case, to actually prevent the SIS from essentially deporting Mr Zawi to serious harm offshore. At the time, the government of Helen Clark backed the SIS 100% in pursuing and persecuting and wrongly imprisoning Mr Zawi, as the courts ultimately came to the conclusion. Mr Speaker, Keith Locke is another who was targeted by the SIS for being a law-abiding dissident, something we should encourage. In fact, there are hundreds of law-abiding New Zealanders whose political beliefs happen to disagree with those of the SIS, and hence they have become the target of surveillance. In a free society, it is wrong for the state security services to target people because of their political beliefs, and yet there is a repeated pattern of the New Zealand security services doing exactly that. Now, some people say, well, we have the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, who's meant to be the safeguard to oversee the SIS. Because the Intelligence and Security Committee can't do it because it's too constrained, the Inspector General is meant to be the safeguard. However, the Inspector General operates in secret, so we don't really know what he does. We do know the few times when we've seen the Inspector General in action was when Laurie Grieg was reviewing the decision of the SIS to issue a security risk certificate against Mr Zawi. Laurie Grieg, who was at the time the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, told the media that Mr Zawi should be sent overseas. He should be outskied. He clearly had a predetermined view of the issue. So while the Intelligence and Security Committee is very limited, and that's the body that we're appointing with this motion, the Inspector General is meant to be the safeguard. But the one occasion when we saw what the Inspector General was doing, we discovered that the Inspector General, who's meant to be an independent check on the activities of the security services, was completely biased. This went to court, and the courts ruled that the Inspector General had to step down from reconsidering the case against Mr Zawi because the Inspector General at the time was clearly biased, and the courts ruled him to get out of the case. So this is the so-called independent check on the security services. That's what's meant to be the independent check on our security services, because the Intelligence and Security Committee, the parliamentary oversight, is so weak. And yet we know that the one time we saw what the Inspector General got up to, he was very, very biased against someone who turned out to be actually a political refugee and the kind of person that people in this parliament should support because he was a Democrat. After that, the Inspector General actually resigned because the courts found against him. So, Mr Speaker, the security services, we recognise that they do some good, that they have an important role. We're not naive about it, but we believe, along with Mr Colby from the CIA, that there should be parliamentary oversight of the security services, and currently we don't have it. One victory for the ISC in the last committee was the inclusion of some human rights provisions in the Act governing the SIS. Along with the Prime Minister, I think I'm now the longest serving member of the Intelligence and Security Committee, the current one, and that was one of the victories that came out. Now, by law, I can't tell you what happens inside the meetings of the Intelligence and Security Committee, but you will know that there was at least a majority inside that committee to support human rights provisions being added to the SIS Act. because how else could it have appeared in the Select Committee recommendations that came back to Parliament? And so that was, I thought, a significant, one small significant thing that we have achieved. So I would say to progressive activists and agitators, to people who stand up for freedom and democracy and human rights, the people who are the targets of the security services traditionally, don't sleep easy in your bed thinking that the Greens are providing good oversight of the security services because we have one person on the Intelligence and Security Committee. There are very real limits to what this committee can do, and so it is essential, if you wish to protect your freedom, you should be as vigilant as possible, and we will do the best job that we can on the committee, but there are real constraints on it. Thank you very much.
I'll put the questions, because both the notice of motion and the terms of reference were taken as one debate. There will be two questions. So the question is that the notice of motion number 1 be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The next question is that the motion in the name of the Leader of the House concerning the terms of reference for the Intelligence and Security Committee be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. We come now to Government Order of the Day number 3.